Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tell me about people you've encountered, whether it's MIB, FBI, reptilians, shapeshifters, or just anyone out of place. So I used to live in an apartment complex facing another of the same size. I lived on the bottom floor and had just gotten a laser pointer I would shine around at bedtime out of boredom. So one night, about 3 a.m., I noticed a car pull up to the apartment adjacent to me. A man and woman come out. They go up the stairs to the 3rd floor, look around for something. Then they went back downstairs, got in their car, and left. Creepy, right? Well, no, I went to bed and thought nothing of it, until I was looking out the window a week later, and they came back, same time. Went upstairs, looked around the ground, went down, got in their car, and left. Then they did it the next night, and the next. I even messed with them, shining my laser at them. But they came back every day for a week, and longer. I stopped watching for them after a week, but would still catch them once in a while. They never found anything, never knocked, never went inside, never went on any other floor, or to any other building.
That apartment is a dead drop, OP. The couple was getting drugs sent to that apartment. They'd go at night to pick them up to avoid suspicion.
I lived in an apartment complex that the buildings faced the road, with a building directly across from the other. I often couldn't sleep at night, much like tonight, and do things to pass the time. One night, out of sheer boredom, I decided to peek out my window. I lifted up one little blind and peeked out. There was just the road, the street lamps, and the buildings. Being the weeaboo I am, I figured that someone left their window open while walking around naked, so I decided to look at the windows in the building. Up on the 2nd floor of the building to my left diagonal was a man with his blinds pulled up and only a lamp illuminating him. All other lights were off. He stood in front of the window staring out. It struck me as odd. He just stood there, barely moving. Only on occasion did he shift his body weight around. I shrugged it off and went back to doing other things. It wasn't until a few weeks after that curiosity poked me to peek out my window again. It was the same as before, nothing interesting. Until I noticed the man again. He was doing the same thing in the same way. He barely moved, and he seemed to be looking into the same spot. I was now intrigued. I then watched him for a good hour, before I got bored and went to sleep. I decided to peek out the window the next night too, and again the man was standing there. I then noticed that he had the same clothes on. It was a blue shirt and black pants. I continued this for several nights, for about an hour the first week, and then it stretched to being 2 hours. I could never figure out what this man was looking at. So one night I decided to go on a bit of a walk. I waited until it was dark and waited for him to approach the window and begin his devoid staring. I walked around looking at the building he was looking at, but nothing interesting was going on. This honestly gave me the chills. I expected that he was staring at someone or something interesting, but it was just the building. I continued to watch him for a few more weeks after that, but now I would just look to see if he was staring still. However, about 3 weeks after my walk, I peeked out and noticed something disturbingly different. He was standing at his window and he was staring, but now he was staring at me. His gaze sent shivers down my side. His gaze seemed like he was staring off into space, but also knew you were there. It had a very apathetic feel too, very devoid of pleasure. I looked at him for a while and went to bed. I was amused that he found a new spot, but also startled. The next night I looked again, and he was staring at me this time as well. I became very unnerved. I thought he might have noticed me, but he couldn't have. I only lifted an individual blind, and the buildings were far enough apart he wouldn't be able to tell a single blind was lifted. In addition to that, my lights were always off because they casted a glare on the window. Nevertheless, I went to bed. The night afterwards was the same deal. This continued 2 more days until Friday. I had gone out with my friends and one was coming over to spend the night. On our way back, with it being barely dusk, I passed by the man's apartment. I looked up and noticed his window was open. It was open too early that day and he was standing in front of it. He was staring down at me, and he appeared annoyed. I stared up at him some more before he shook his head and closed the blinds. I didn't look out the window that night. I was too entertained. However, the night afterwards I did, and his window was closed and no light was on. I figured he went out on a date for once, but this wasn't the case. In the time that I was there until I moved, he never opened the window again. I know he didn't move because I remembered his car and it was still there when I moved out. Whatever it was he was looking for, I guess he found it.
When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was out in my garden helping my mother water the plants. A man in business-type clothes, collared shirt, tie, khakis, came jogging down the sidewalk, which I remember thinking was strange because of how he was dressed. He proceeded to jog right up to my mother. "Hey, Melissa," he said. My mom began to say, "I'm not Melly," but he cut her off, saying, "I'm really thirsty. Could I have a sip from that hose?" Thoroughly confused, my mom slowly handed him the hose. He drank from it, and then began jogging off. As he continued on his way, he shouted out, "Thanks, Melissa." My mother's name is not Melissa, and to this day neither she nor myself have any idea what was going on with this guy. Not paranormal or even really creepy, just strange.
I'd gotten up early one morning to kind of hang around outside until the shops opened. As I walked around a strip mall, I saw an old homeless-looking man who appeared to be in distress. He was grabbing his chest and leaning against a pole. So my first instinct was to try and run over and help this guy. But I took one step and heard a familiar voice. "David, get into the car." It was a close friend of the family. She was 3/4 Navajo, if that means anything. But that old man is in real trouble. Get into the car. So she drives me home. No real reason for her to be up this early and out driving. How did you know I was out there? I just did. Don't ask. Can you tell me what just happened? No, I can't. But will that old man could be? There was nobody there. I'm not just telling you that. There really was nobody there. Nobody I saw with my eyes, at least. And you were about to walk up to right where nobody was. Don't ask or talk any more about this. I wonder just what the fuck I was walking right towards.
I was in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Not paranormal, but makes me feel little goosebumps. I was walking to the store in my late teens. As I went to cross the street, I saw two guys in a car gesturing. I looked closer, and they were actually gesturing me to leave quickly and mouthing, "Move your ass." So I did. I stepped way the hell back. I soon found out what they wanted. It wasn't me at all. I was just in their way, and they had to move quickly. As I got to a safe distance, I saw them walk out of the car, side by side, and march to my building and around the back. I heard a muffled altercation, and then loud screaming. They ran back out to the car, got in, and drove like hell. No, who they wanted was my neighbor, an unfortunate man who had crossed them somewhere along the line. They had found him in the back, and then cut off 2 of his fingers. I didn't see him or any gore, because I got the hell out of there when I heard the screams. I did see him much later with the stumps, though, as he enjoyed a beer.
Hey friends, I'm new to the /x/ section, as in like lizard people and shit, but I thought I'd share and maybe you guys had similar experiences or could shed light on mine. Strange people have been showing up in my town. Now, my town isn't that big nor that small, but after living here my whole life, you recognize faces, cars, and generally, the caliber of people that reside here. It started around Thanksgiving. My roommate and I started noticing these strangers. My friend was at a liquor store and he told me about this dude who just kept staring at him and kept getting close. Mind you, this doesn't sound out of the ordinary, but for where I'm from, it is. I came up with a logical answer. People's family from out of state were visiting and they are just different. Where it gets weird is that more and more have been showing up even after the holidays. Here's where the story gets weird. I'm at Walmart and a well-dressed, very well-to-do man was walking around, almost observing people. Then I notice him observing me. I go to check out my things. Again, for a Thursday night, most of the crowd seems familiar except for this one man who's doing a good job at keeping his distance, occasionally breaking my line of sight and reappearing elsewhere. I got to my apartment, put away groceries, and grabbed my shotgun from the closet. Paranoid, I know. I just can't shake that feeling of that guy still watching. I hear the stairs creak that lead to the front door. The wooden steps leading to our apartment are quite old, so you can't really be sneaky walking up them. I walk to the door and look out the peephole. It's that same guy at the bottom of the stairs. I freak shit. My heart sinks. Then my neighbor opens their door to leave. The guy loses his cool, like he got caught doing something wrong, and begins to go down the stairs. Tell my roommate after he gets off of his night shift. He tells me about how some strange lady has been popping up in the places he frequents. So we begin to take note of this shit. These are the most prominent occurrences. Hipster coffee shop, go there every day for 2 years, practically know everyone. Group of people, 3 men, 2 women, obvious outsiders show up at random at odd times. They all order their drinks and sit down and don't say a fucking word for an hour and then leave. At our college campus, these strangers have been reported to campus security for wandering the campus late at night and looking around in the parking garages. All of the strangers we see seem to be observing and watching everyone. And the last scary part, which I'm not sure if it's even related, but I was at my parents' house last week and got snowed in. Decided to stay to not risk crashing my car. They live on a farm pretty far from the city. They've told me that they've had animals go missing and found footprints, and even have caught people hopping our fence leaving the property. All of the neighbors have been having the problem too, and we've never had this issue, even if it is just hoodlums. So what is going on here?
Pod people or government agents observing the effects of a chemical they're testing on your town, depending on if you prefer aliens or government.
I live in the middle of nowhere in rural Montana. Make friends with a guy who lives and works on a ranch. His younger brother is friends with my younger brother. They were freshmen at the time I was a senior. Kid was always kinda strange, but seemed all right. Talked about serial killers a lot. One day, a lockdown was called and the whole school was evacuated. The police show up, multiple cars and a van. Find out that the kid cut another kid with a pair of scissors. Drug dogs detected something in his locker shortly afterwards. Bleach and ammonia. He got expelled for attacking a kid and attempting to gas the school, had to wear an ankle bracelet, and got arrested for trying to go to his older brother's graduation because he was forbidden from being on school property. Kinda feel bad for him, to be honest. Played tabletop games with his older brother a while after the incident. He was wearing a torn-up t-shirt with bloodstains on it. They work on a ranch, so it was probably cow's blood from birthing or butchering, but most farmers change out of their work clothes, especially when they have blood on them. After all this, I still can't really hate the guy for some reason, but I'm pretty sure he's a sociopath or something.
At Walmart at 4 a.m. getting cooking oil. The reason I'm awake at this time is because I was working nights during that time but called in sick that night. Walmart is located in the bad part of town. Got cooking oil. Walk out to my car. Get in. Start it up. Random person comes out of nowhere. I say person because I honestly can't tell if this person was a guy or girl. Person asks for a ride to an even worse part of town. Like the worst part, shootings and gangs and all. Obviously I say no. Was getting mad suspicious vibes. Drive off. Driving down the road. See 3 police SUVs with searchlights on driving along. Lights trained on bushes and sides of buildings. Did I just avoid becoming an accessory to crime? I think the person they were looking for was the attempted hitchhiker. Also probably avoided being murdered too, haha.
Keck, don't you love when your instincts save your life? Ha, the best times.
Too many to name. Creepiest people you will see will work in the psychiatric wards. Those guys are just plain old sadists that try to make you look mad if you step outside the social norms, that they don't even follow themselves and physically assault and torture you when you try to defend yourself from that shit and try to get help for whatever physical treatment you actually need. So many cases like that, man. It's not even funny anymore. Sketchy people have had literal gang stalking in an online video game happen for months, multiple times. It's not even friendly type or humorous. They just want me to fucking die IRL for some reason when I'm just trying to relax with the game. Those people just randomly get on the server as soon as some other people from their in-group notice me and then proceed to somehow magically join every server with me in it afterwards to kick me out. I'm not even fucking with you at all. I think those guys are possessed by some form of demons or energy vampires.
On my anniversary, I met a magical hobo and received a life-extending blessing. The hobo was a mythical figure in the city where I grew up. His name was Amanullah. Although he had been homeless for years, the old Persian man always wore dress shoes, a pristine suit, and a fedora. And yes, he was in the right age category to unironically wear a fedora. He spoke in rhymes, and it was known he had the power to either become invisible at will or teleport, though the public couldn't agree on which. These magical powers were important to the story of Amanullah, as they were his defense against his rich family. It was known that he had a family full of millionaires out in California who frequently wandered our gray city to drag Amanullah back to their mansions. But as soon they came near cornering him, he would simply disappear. What gave him these powers? I can't say, but I do know that for years, Amanullah had always carried 2 dark suitcases with him. The contents of the suitcases were, as you can imagine, a source of interesting discussion. One rumor held that they were filled with advanced mathematics textbooks and class notes from Amanullah's days as a professor of advanced mathematics. It was said that the study of advanced mathematics was what had made him mentally ill. Another rumor held that they were filled with explosives, ready to punish anyone with a heart cruel enough to attack a kindly old homeless man. The latter was ridiculous, as he had no need for weapons. Amanullah was our city's own Emperor Norton, and people who knew him loved him. Many people pulled over whenever they saw him walking at the roadside and offered him all the cash they had on them. Churches welcomed him as an overnight guest. And of course, someone must have been letting him use their laundry facilities and bathrooms, as he always looked like he had stepped off a movie set. But these suitcases could not have been the source of his powers, as one day, he simply stopped carrying them, but retained his magical spell over those who had heard of him. I asked my best friend's mother about his ability to disappear, and she said his abilities were such that only those who were not looking for him could see him. The first time I met Amanullah was when I was volunteering for Food Not Bombs, an organization that provides free food to anyone who wants it, generally in lower-income areas. My best friend was volunteering with me that day, as he often did when we both saw the well-dressed man approach. As it was a hot day, I was wearing just a vest with no shirt underneath, leading Amanullah to exclaim, "Hello, fine gentlemen and beautiful ladies. Happy Shirtless Friday," bringing forth many smiles from our group. He then proceeded to ask about half of the volunteers their names and wrote a poem on the spot about each one. He could not spell very well, but his poems were all flattering and affectionate. After he left with various grocery items, my best friend excitedly informed me that we had just seen Amanullah himself. After I told the story to my ex, who I was dating at that time, we made a pact that if we ever saw Amanullah together, we would immediately take him out to a nice dinner. By the time we neared our 1-year anniversary, we had nearly forgotten this pact, never having seen him again. Instead, we were focused on buying gift certificates for the fancy restaurant where we wanted to celebrate our anniversary. And yet, when we arrived at the plush restaurant, they refused to honor the gift certificates we had already bought. Angry and disappointed, we walked for about a mile, and then, for lack of any remaining plans, stepped into a thrift store. As you can perhaps guess, Amanullah was right inside. I pulled my ex aside and excitedly whispered that the man in the suit and fancy hat was the magical hobo I had told so many stories about. We immediately began looking for him again so we could ask him to dinner. As you can probably guess once more, he was gone. We walked up and down the aisles of the large, crowded thrift store for almost 20 minutes until we finally gave up. On our way out, of course, he stepped directly in front of us. Happy but unnerved, I asked him to come to dinner with us. He said he had no money. I insisted that he give us the honor of his company and pick the restaurant of his choice. He finally agreed, selecting a nearby Mexican restaurant. Walking inside with him, we felt like children walking with our eccentric grandfather. He greeted everyone who came within a 5-foot radius of our group, asked them their names, and made a poem about them. He asked me for my name again as well, and once more came up with a sweet and badly spelled poem before doing the same for my ex. After placing our orders, I tried to grill him as gently as possible. I mentioned having seen his suitcases before, though I had only heard of them through our local folklore, and asked what had become of them. He said that they were filled with top-secret documents that the president had entrusted him with. I said I was a student at the local university and asked, in a terrible but sincere attempt at subtlety, whether he liked mathematics and science courses. He said he had once been a professor of advanced mathematics, but had to quit after the government recruited him to handle the nation's important issues. During our meal, he rejected the very idea of ordering alcohol, instead sipping water and encouraging us to share a 3-item platter with him. He would not order dessert either, saying we were too generous. Although the food and service had not impressed me, I was glad that the staff had been kind to the loud, friendly poet and left feeling happy. Before we parted ways, my ex and I decided to tell him this had been our 1-year anniversary dinner. He said most couples would prefer to be alone on that day, and thanked us for inviting him into it. Then, in his strong and distinctively accented voice, he gave us a blessing that allowed us to each live for 100 more years. I was 20 at the time and my ex was 19, so that means 120 for me and 119 for my partner, a not entirely impossible prediction. Since then, I have developed a heart condition that landed me in the ER, very nearly gotten hit by a car while riding my bike in traffic, and been dragged half unconscious out of the back room of a tiny restaurant while a city crew was on its way to handle a major carbon monoxide leak. But a part of me is always less afraid now, the part that believes in the blessing, or at least in the idea that one can be blessed outside of a poorly staffed Mexican restaurant, near a thrift store, by an exceptionally sane, crazy bag man who made the streets and churches of a fading Rust Belt city his home. I suppose that's the part of me that keeps surfing /x/ at 3 a.m. on weekdays too.
Creepy. I met a few schizos. I noticed they usually have atypical sense of humor or no sense of humor at all. They don't laugh at jokes and they believe outright lies. This one guy pretended that somebody he knew died of cancer, but then everybody confirmed it was a lie. The schizo eventually started dressing unusually and roaming around yelling at people like a psycho. I do believe in the paranormal, of course, but there are also still loons out there. Don't get the supernatural and schizophrenia mixed up. They are separate, and there is a dichotomy. You are either crazy, or you actually did see the real paranormal. Sketchy. I met this overly smug girl one time who looked extremely similar to the overly smug girl that I've been seeing in my dreams for about 18 years now.
What kind of dreams do you have about her?
Sometimes in places that I've never seen before, and when it's in a real place that I know of in real life, I usually end up coincidentally going to that place later the same day, not by choice, but by coincidence. This one time she was telling me to get something over with quickly, and pulling on my hand, and I told her I'd be right there, and after I woke up, I ended up falling, about an hour later or less, and cutting the same hand open that same day. I actually definitely think of her as good, though, after knowing her for 18 years.
Not really scary, more confusing. When I was 19, 6 years ago, some friends and I went to a town called Woodburn, Woodbury, which didn't show up on the maps. It was so small. What led us there was the stories we had heard from our friend Katie. She grew up in a schoolhouse on the edge of Woodburn that her mother converted into a diner. Right off the bat, things were weird in the house. Their dog refused to enter some rooms and would get inexplicably scared once the sun went down. They had the dog for years previous to moving into the house, and this was unusual behavior. Some mornings they'd wake up and find shit rearranged in the kitchen. On one strange morning, they found that every knife in the kitchen had been stabbed in the ceiling and the plates had been stacked into piles that touched the ceiling, wedged so tightly that it took force and finagling to get the plates loose from the stacks. One night, Katie and her sister were watching movies when the lamp in the room turned off. They heard the power switch make an audible click, After they turned it back on, they noticed a shadow on the wall that shouldn't have been there. A disembodied shadow that had no discernible source and didn't disappear when lights were shined on it. Katie and her sister decided to wait in their bedroom until their mother came home. While in their bedroom, they fell asleep, their mother being later than usual. They thought they heard her car pull up and her car door open and close. They heard what they assumed was their mother entering the house and coming upstairs, so they jumped out of bed to meet her, only to realize the house was empty. They freaked out and returned to their room only to find that the strange shadow was in their room on their back wall. They stood there and stared at it, and it opened a pair of eyes and stared back. This is when they fled the house and ran to the neighbors with their dog. The next day, Katie and her sister switched to a different bedroom. As far as I know, things were quiet for a while until one night their mother was late coming home again. They girls had moved from the first floor to the third floor of the house and were in the room right next to their mother's. Around 2 a.m., they heard what they thought was their mother in her bedroom. They went to investigate only to find their dog whimper growling at something in the dark corner of the room. They took the dog and ran to the bathroom and hid in the bathtub until morning. Katie told us that she tried to calm her sister down by telling her that they were safe in the bathroom. The next night was quiet, but in the morning they couldn't find their dog. Searched high and low, and all they found was the dog's collar, sitting in the bathtub where they had taken refuge the previous night. Apparently, the mother was having her own strange experiences because later that week, she grabbed the girls one night and took them to a hotel and did not return until the morning. They moved out the next day. They sold the house to a contractor who was going to fix it up so it could go back to being used as a school. Time passed. Roughly 10 years after having left that town, Katie relayed this story to me and a friend of mine. We were friends of her boyfriend at the time. Having nothing better to do, we decided to take a road trip to check out the house. It was in a different part of the state. When we got to the town, things were odd right off the bat. Hell, we didn't even make it to the town before shit got weird. Since the town wasn't on the maps, we had to go by word-of-mouth directions, and when we got close, we stopped at a gas station to ask how to get to Woodburn. They looked at us like we had just turned into a couple of aliens and asked in a perturbed voice why on earth we'd have a reason to go there. We told them we were visiting friends, which seemed to worry the cashier even more. So we paid for our gas and left, not know what to make of that strange lady. When we entered the town, the first thing we noticed was that some sort of festival/fair/hoedown was going on. They had blocked off the main road through town with fire engines, and there was a large group of people sitting around a large bonfire in the middle of the road. What bothered me was how quiet it was, as if everyone there was sitting in complete silence. No music, no talking, nothing but the wind. The schoolhouse wasn't hard to find. It was up on a hill overlooking the town. It was very run down. The windows were gone and the paint was peeling everywhere. There wasn't even a front door anymore. The only thing that seemed to be maintained was the cellar door, which was under chain and lock. When looking for a way in and went around the backside of the building only to find a trailer there, with a family living in it. These were not the people Katie had told us her mother sold the house to. We have no idea who the hell they were or why they were there. I think they were poor squatters who were using the school as a garage. They didn't look too happy to see us, so in an attempt to defuse the situation, we told them we were a well-known university in our state and were part of a group of paranormal researcher, even made up a fake professor and gave a fake number to call in the morning, telling them he was probably asleep, it being near midnight. We told them all we wanted to do was place a recording device in the building and leave. They let us in and we started to search the schoolhouse. The whole place was decrepit and stank like old meat. There was junk all over that I assumed belonged to the squatters. They were making use of the 2 rooms closest to the front door. There was enough dust everywhere that we could see footprints. It looked like the squatters never went past these first 2 rooms. We went further in, and in the kitchen we found a goofy-looking vase sitting on a pillar. Completely fucking random. Right in the middle of the room. It was filled with some thick black liquid that had a really strong smell to it. Hard to describe. It looked like Hershey syrup, but it had a smell reminiscent of rotten eggs. We noticed some blatantly satanic graffiti, but due to the poor spelling and the shitty silver coloring, we assumed it was just kids or something. This is where we started to notice that it was cold. which was odd because the outside temp was roughly 80 degrees, and there was no glass in any of the windows on the building. We started to hear the squatter wife freaking out outside, and we heard her son complaining about how we should be in here. He kept saying, "They are gonna get those guys, they are gonna get those guys." Assuming we were about to get kicked out, we decided to check out the third floor where Katie's dog vanished. The second floor had all kinds of markings, like someone was planning on doing construction, which seemed normal based on what Katie told us, but then we saw the stairs going up to the third floor. Someone had meticulously disassembled basically everything, so all that was left was structural support beams and a ton of very expensive power tools sitting covered in dust. I have no idea why someone would abandon thousands of dollars worth of tools or abandon a construction project after one floor. Then we noticed a human tooth, a molar, sitting on one of the floorboards, standing up on its roots like it had been placed there, no dust on it. We decided to check out the cellar before we left and headed downstairs. As we were going down, we started to feel a draft from the third floor and couldn't identify a source. We found the stairs leading to the cellar and were hit with a strong smell of dead things, like rotten animals. It's very common for raccoons and other small animals to get trapped and die in older houses around here, so we didn't think much of it until we started down the stairs. We heard what sounded like crunching and chewing. It sounded like a dog chewing on a chicken carcass, closest analogy I can make. We didn't like the sound and decided to bail. On the way out, the squatter wife was standing at the door screaming incomprehensible shit at us while her husband tried to calm her down, and her son cried. We blew past them and went for our car only to see a sheriff booking it towards us. We took off in the other direction, but he didn't follow. He just stopped at the schoolhouse and started taping off the building. We took a bunch of pics too, but didn't find anything interesting on them. And now Katie has the flash drive. We don't keep in contact with Katie anymore, but I've thought about returning to the schoolhouse. Very strange place.
Dunno if this really fits here, but this thread made me remember it. It's about a cat I used to have. So first off, after losing our family cat after 17 years of love, we decided to get another one. Well, it was supposed to be one, but we ended up with a brother and sister pair. Like a lot of sibling cats, they didn't look at all alike. The female, who is still alive, is a big, fat, fluffy tortoiseshell, the dumbest and most lovely thing you can imagine. The male, though, was a slender tuxedo cat with really long, silky hair instead of fur. He was the smart one, always figuring things out first, and ruled the house. Both were friendly, although the male was more bonded to my brother than me. From the moment we brought them into the house, I began seeing a strange boy, mostly human, but oddly black and white, with big staring eyes. At most, I'd see him in the corner of my eye for a moment, then he'd vanish. At first, I thought I was just seeing the cat. He liked to run around unexpectedly and was very quiet. But even when the cat wasn't around, I might see the boy. There was a certain feeling in the air when I saw him, a slight hostility, curiosity, but mostly just the feeling of being watched by an intelligent being. I'd see the boy at least once a day. Sometimes when I was home alone with the cats, it could be as often as 5 or 6 times. I never told anyone. Fast forward a bit, the summer before I go off to college, the cats accidentally got left outside all night when I was gone. In the morning, only the female came back, and she was badly injured, clearly had been in a fight with something. The male never returned. In the few weeks before I had to go to college, I saw the boy less and less, maybe once or twice a week. When I went home for the holidays that first year, I saw him again. Haven't seen the boy in 3 years, so I guess he's gone.
A few years ago, I was a junior in high school, I think. Had friends over late at night, and we decided to go walk around my neighborhood. West Side, Great Falls, Montana. Ghetto shit everywhere, including PIC-related, a railroad bridge not too far from where I used to live. People would often get on this bridge to take pictures and whatnot. We were walking around in the dark, and this bridge was our shortcut back to my place. The West Side lacked street lights in many places, especially the areas surrounding the bridge. Once you get on the bridge, it's damn near impossible to see anything but the silhouette of the frame against the starry sky. Unfortunately for us, it was cloudy that night. We begin walking across, already nervous because the bridge doesn't appear to be very stable. We whisper to each other, but begin to realize that we hear other people talking. We all stop and look around. We can't see anyone else on the tracks. I look up and see that there are people on top of the bridge frame. The only way to get up there is climb the bars near the edge, which are incredibly narrow. They don't appear to notice us. Turn around, see something I really didn't want to see. Two people, one on each side, began crawling onto the tracks from under the bridge. We were petrified, but they didn't appear to be wanting to scare us. We walk away slowly, all moments away from shitting ourselves.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.